In the sun-drenched coastal enclave of Santa Monica, California, on August 23, 1985, Stephen Miller entered the world as the second child in a family steeped in liberal values and Jewish heritage. His parents, Michael D. Miller, a successful real estate investor, and Miriam Glosser, a former social worker turned homemaker, raised him in an environment that embodied progressive ideals. The Millers lived in a diverse, affluent neighborhood where tolerance and multiculturalism were the norm. Yet beneath this veneer of liberalism lay a deeper story of immigration and resilience. Stephen's maternal great-grandfather, Wolf Lieb Glosser, had fled the brutal anti-Semitic pogroms in Belarus in 1903, arriving penniless in America. Through sheer determination, he built a thriving business in Pennsylvania. A tale of the American dream that would ironically become a point of contention in Stephen's later life. Young Stephen grew up hearing these stories, but they seemed to plant seeds of irony rather than empathy, as his path would veer sharply toward restrictionism. From an early age, Miller showed signs of intellectual curiosity, but it was during his teenage years at Santa Monica High School, from 1999 to 2003, that his divergence from his family's politics began to crystallize. The school was a melting pot of cultures, with a student body that reflected California's diversity. Yet, Miller chafed against what he perceived as enforced multiculturalism. He later recounted how the school's response to the September 11, 2001 attacks, focusing on tolerance toward Muslims rather than outright patriotism, ignited his conservative awakening. It was here that he discovered the writings of Rush Limbaugh, the bombastic conservative radio host whose book The Way Things Ought to Be became a Bible for the young contrarian. Limbaugh's unapologetic critiques of liberalism, media bias, and political correctness resonated deeply with Miller, who saw in them a counter-narrative to the progressive echo chamber around him. Another pivotal influence was Ben Shapiro's Brainwashed: How Universities Indoctrinate America's Youth, which Miller credited with exposing the radical indoctrination in education. These books weren't just reading material, they were catalysts for action. Emboldened, Stephen Miller began appearing on conservative talk radio shows, including The Larry Elder Show, where he lambasted his school's policies and championed free market principles. His sharp tongue and willingness to confront authority figures made him a local sensation among right-wing listeners. It was during this period that David Horowitz, the former Marxist-turned-conservative firebrand, took notice. Horowitz, who had founded the David Horowitz Freedom Center in 1988 to combat leftist ideologies, saw in Miller a kindred spirit, a young warrior ready to battle political correctness. Horowitz invited the high schooler to speak at events sponsored by his center, providing Miller with his first taste of national conservative networking. This connection would prove enduring, as Horowitz's anti-multiculturalism rhetoric and campaigns against affirmative action began to shape Miller's worldview. Even then, Miller's views were extreme for his age. He publicly decried multiculturalism as divisive, arguing it undermined American unity. His family, puzzled by this shift, watched as their son alienated peers and embraced a radical conservatism that seemed at odds with their immigrant legacy. Graduating high school in 2003, Miller headed to Duke University in North Carolina, pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. Duke, with its prestigious reputation and diverse campus, became the crucible where Miller's radical activities truly ignited. He quickly joined the Duke Conservative Union, a student group dedicated to promoting right-wing ideas in a predominantly liberal environment. Under Horowitz's continued mentorship, facilitated through the Freedom Center, Miller organized provocative events designed to challenge campus progressivism. One of his earliest efforts was inviting Horowitz himself to speak in 2004, where the activist railed against affirmative action and what he called leftist indoctrination in academia. Miller defended Horowitz vigorously against accusations of racism, positioning himself as a defender of free speech against politically correct censorship. Miller's activism escalated in his columns for the student newspaper The Chronicle. Writing regularly, he unleashed scathing critiques of affirmative action, labeling it institutional racism and reverse discrimination that penalized merit-based achievement. In pieces like his 2005 column, he argued that such policies created racial paranoia and undermined true equality. His writings extended to multiculturalism, which he mocked as a hollow virtue signaling that divided rather than united. Immigration, too, crept into his rhetoric. He decried open borders as a threat to American sovereignty, echoing Horowitz's nativist leanings. These columns weren't measured debates. They were incendiary, designed to provoke outrage and draw battle lines. Classmates and faculty often responded with letters accusing him of insensitivity and bigotry, but Miller thrived on the controversy, seeing it as validation of his fight against liberal hegemony. The pinnacle of Miller's Duke radicalism came during the 2006-2007 Duke lacrosse scandal, a case that thrust him into the national spotlight. When 3 white lacrosse players were falsely accused of raping a black exotic dancer, Miller emerged as their most vocal defender on campus. He appeared on national television, including The O'Reilly Factor, decrying the rush to judgment by the media, Duke faculty, and progressive activists. He specifically targeted the group of 88 professors who had signed a statement condemning the lacrosse team's culture, framing them as radical leftists, perpetuating a narrative of white guilt and victimology. For Miller, the case was emblematic of broader cultural wars, a hoax fueled by racial double standards and liberal bias. His rhetoric was unyielding, portraying the accused as victims of a politically correct witch hunt. Critics saw this as opportunistic and racially charged, exploiting a sensitive incident to advance his agenda. The backlash was intense. Peers labeled him abrasive and isolated, with even some conservatives distancing themselves from his tactics. Yet, the exposure honed his media savvy and reinforced his belief in confrontation as a tool for change. Another flashpoint was the 2007 Islamofascism Awareness Week, which Miller spearheaded as part of Horowitz's national campaign. The event featured screenings of the documentary Obsession: Radical Islam's War Against the West, and speeches equating Islam with terrorism. Flyers and talks used inflammatory language, warning of jihadists and cultural threats. Muslim student groups and faculty protested vehemently, accusing Miller of promoting Islamophobia and hate speech. Miller countered by arguing that critics were appeasing extremists, doubling down on his narrative of Western vulnerability. This event, more than any other, cemented his reputation as a radical provocateur, aligning him with far-right ideologies that viewed multiculturalism and immigration as existential dangers. Horowitz's influence was palpable. His playbook of fighting fire with fire taught Miller to embrace slanderous extremism, turning campus debates into ideological battlegrounds. By the time Miller graduated in 2007, his Duke years had transformed him from a high school contrarian into a hardened conservative activist. The controversies had radicalized him further, instilling a deep-seated anger toward progressive institutions. As biographer Jean Guerrero later described in Hatemonger, Duke was where Miller's alienation crystallized into nativism, with events like the lacrosse case and Islamofascism Week fueling his distrust of liberalism. These experiences also built crucial networks. Horowitz's endorsement opened doors, recommending Miller for internships in conservative circles. Post-graduation, Miller's rise accelerated through strategic placements in Washington. In 2008, he landed a role as communications director for Republican Congressman John Shadegg of Arizona. This position allowed him to hone his messaging skills on conservative issues like fiscal responsibility and limited government. But it was a stepping stone. Miller's ambitions pointed toward bigger battles, particularly on immigration. In 2009, Horowitz personally introduced him to Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, a staunch immigration restrictionist whose hardline views aligned perfectly with Miller's emerging nativism. What started as a brief interview extended into a deep discussion, revealing shared visions on globalization and border security. Sessions hired Miller as his press secretary, a move that would prove transformative. A defining chapter was their 2013 to 2014 crusade against the bipartisan Gang of Eight immigration reform bill, which sought to legalize millions of undocumented immigrants while bolstering border security. Sessions led the Senate opposition, but Miller was the architect behind the scenes. He authored a 23-page handbook for House Republicans, packed with fear-mongering statistics on crime, wages, and cultural erosion. Coordinating with restrictionist allies, Miller bombarded media outlets with lurid stories of immigrant-related crimes, framing reformers as globalist elites betraying American workers. The bill passed the Senate but died in the House, a resounding victory that validated their tactics and radicalized Miller further. This experience deepened his exposure to far-right ecosystems. Sessions' office became a hub for anti-immigrant networking, where Miller pitched ideas like ending DACA and curbing H-1B visas. Sessions' influence extended beyond policy to ideology. He provided institutional cover for Miller to mainstream white nationalist adjacent theories, such as the Great Replacement, which posits that immigrants are displacing white populations. Leaked emails from 2019 would later reveal Miller forwarding articles from sites like VDAR and American Renaissance, outlets promoting white genocide to Breitbart News editors. Critics, including Guerrero, describe this as a case study in radicalization, blending personal ambition with far-right online influences under Sessions' wing. Miller denied extremism, framing his stance as patriotic nationalism, but the evidence painted a picture of deepening radicalism. By 2015, Miller's expertise made him indispensable. When Sessions became the first senator to endorse Donald Trump in 2016, he recommended Miller for the campaign. Joining as a senior policy advisor and speechwriter, Miller crafted Trump's convention speeches, embedding America First nativism that echoed Sessions and Horowitz. He advised on debate prep, earning Trump's trust as a fierce loyalist. Miller's radical views found a perfect vessel in Trump's populist rhetoric. He pushed for promises like the border wall and Muslim ban, drawing from his Duke-honed provocation skills. Family tensions peaked in 2018 when Miller's uncle, David S. Glosser, penned a Politico essay calling him an immigration hypocrite, highlighting the irony of their shared ancestry. Yet, Miller remained unyielding, surviving Trump's inner circle purges through loyalty. After Trump's 2020 loss, Miller founded America First Legal in 2021, a conservative litigation group targeting woke policies on immigration, affirmative action, and more, extending his radical activism into the legal realm. In Trump's second administration, inaugurated in January 2025, Miller reemerged as an untouchable force, advising on mass deportations, Department of Government efficiency initiatives, and anti-Antifa efforts. He leveraged Capitol Hill networks for sweeping wins. By mid-2025, he was instrumental in operations like Los Angeles deportations, cementing his status as Trump's ideological enforcer. Stephen Miller's journey from liberal enclave to power's pinnacle is a tale of radical transformation. Influences like Limbaugh's bombast, Horowitz's mentorship, and Sessions' obstructionism molded a worldview of nativist extremism. His activities, from Duke provocations to White House policies, reveal a man driven by confrontation, unapologetic in his pursuit of an America First vision that critics see as divisive and dangerous. At 40, Miller's ascent shows no signs of slowing, a frightening sign of how willing so many Americans are to embrace overt racism and fascism. Once again, I'm Machine Pun Kelly, aka MPK, and thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, remember to click like and subscribe.